The FDA hosted an industry webinar on Friday, May 20th to provide an overview and answer questions on FDA's guidance to provide flexibility to manufacturers to increase infant formula supply. During the webinar, we received many questions from attendees that we would like to address at this time. I'm Janisha Robbs with FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Communications and Public Engagement staff. Here with me today to answer your questions are Dr. Patricia Hansen, Deputy Director of CFSAN's Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling, and Mr. John Verbaden, Deputy Director for Import Operations Enforcement in the Office of Regulatory Affairs. I will begin with our first question regarding specific types of certificates or certifications. And our first question comes from Valentine Jager. Is a European IFS food certificate fulfilling the cGMP certification requirements in this case? For example, does certification of cGMP need to be third-party audit certificate?
The certification regarding cGMPs referred to in our guidance is basically a signed statement or attestation that the manufacturer has established current good manufacturing practices, including quality control procedures and in-process controls and testing required by current good manufacturing practices designed to prevent adulteration of formulas produced at that facility. If a manufacturer has an IFS food certificate or similar type of document, it will be helpful to provide that as well. In our guidance, we also specify the need to provide a schematic diagram, that is a process flow diagram, with processing times and temperatures. Helpful also to identify the control points on the diagram. And importantly, we are asking for a written narrative that includes, but is not limited to, a summary of the process flow, heating and processing conditions, and critical control points. If you have an existing hazard analysis and critical control point plan, a preventive controls plan, or a similar plan or other documents that address these issues that I've listed off, then you can provide that. A copy of a recent internal or third-party audit may also be helpful. You do not have to write an entirely new document.
All right, so we have a question from Christine Bradley, and it reads, will FDA plan to conduct an audit of the production facilities before enforcement discretion has been applied, if no FDA audit has been conducted?
Thank you, and good question. At this time, there are no inspections planned, but as these firms are marketing food products in the U.S., they will be subject to inspection, and FDA will make those decisions on a case-by-case basis.
The next question is from Leguanic Ald. Can we submit organic formula under European organic certification? Because we know that the requirements are different between European organic and U.S. organic regarding milk products.
FDA is accepting requests for enforcement discretion involving formulas labeled as organic. I will caution, though, that organic labeling is regulated by USDA and not FDA. And so for particular points regarding compliance or what may be needed, particularly with respect to organic labeling, manufacturers will need to contact USDA on this issue.
The next question is from Caroline Futo. Since this concerns dairy products, I assumed that these shipments will have to be accompanied by a veterinary health certificate. Will APHIS import permit be required for infant formula?
The quick answer to that is yes. We have been working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they have provided us contact points for industry as well as a link to their industry portal, and we can provide that information as part of this webinar.
We received a question from John Atwater. How can one know what the distribution is down to the retail level if a foreign manufacturer has not distributed product into the U.S.?
In our guides, we requested distribution plans down to the retail level if available. So for manufacturers already distributing products in the U.S. marketplace, we'd expect that such plans would be available. We recognize that for some requesters, this will not be possible. We would like to receive from requesters, though, as much information as they have available regarding their distribution plans, including the status of their development.
Our next question comes from Sarah Powell Price. Will companies approved for formula release be publicly posted?
Yes. The agency will post those firms and the products that they're approved for, and the information on where to find that on FDA.gov will be coming later.
The next question is from Jonna Wolfert. Who will coordinate distribution if, for example, European exporters do not yet have access to the market? And similar to that question, we received another question from Ralph Itcher. Is FDA or State Department providing contacts once the FDA has green-lighted the product?
Thank you, Janisha. Simply put, the FDA is not coordinating distribution of the formula, nor are we providing and matching up, making contacts between manufacturers and other aspects of the supply chain they may need to engage with in the U.S.
And our next question is from Christina Alexander. What is the necessary import permit, and do we still have to apply for it?
There is not a specific permit with FDA that is required to import, but as food manufacturing facilities, there is a registration requirement with FDA. And we'll be providing a link where you can go online to FDA.gov and complete your food facility registration for FDA.
Our next question is from Jeremy. It's been reported that the American government will air freight via military aircraft formula to the America. Is this true? And is it applicable to all products?
I think our questioner is referring to Operation Fly Formula. On May 19th, President Biden launched an effort called Operation Fly Formula, which authorizes the Department of Health and Human Services, of which FDA is a part, and the Department of Agriculture to use Department of Defense contracted commercial aircraft to pick up overseas infant formula so it can get to store shelves more quickly. Only products that FDA determines meet U.S. health and safety standards and for which we provide a letter of enforcement discretion under this policy, only those are eligible for this program. This is a fast evolving kind of program and situation, and I can say that we will provide more information on it as it becomes available.
And then we have a question about metric measures, and are metric measures acceptable on the label, and does the FDA intend to provide consumer resources to help them understand why a product might look different?
Good question. Metric measures on the label will be acceptable. FDA does intend to provide consumers with resources to help understand why labels look different and understand and use the information where metric units are employed. We will be posting those. There's a team actually working on that as I speak. And we're also encouraging our stakeholders, food industry trade groups, for example, to do similar, to help amplify that educational effort for consumers to understand labels where some things may look different.
Another question, and this one is from Ben Busser. Is the no objection specific to each import, or will that product be allowed from that moment onwards forever?
Once the no objection is provided, then that will cover all shipments of the product from that particular firm going forward.
So we received many questions about timeframes for the enforcement discretion, review, and process. One question that we received was from Tori Smith. What is the FDA's specific timeline for the evaluation of new enforcement discretion submissions? Within how many days will submissions be evaluated and notified?
That is a great question. I know we received a couple along these lines. FDA is working to review these requests for enforcement discretion as quickly as possible. We can't provide a specific timeline for the completion of reviews of these requests because it depends in part on the completeness of the requester's application and the substance of the information provided. Another factor is the number of requests in the queue. I can tell you that we have set up a process where initial triage review is done to assess completeness of the application. Completeness, that is, in terms of the types of information we described in our enforcement discretion policy guidance. If there are gaps in the information, we are notifying requesters within days to 1 week. What happens after that largely depends on the responsiveness of the requester. We issued our first letter of enforcement discretion under the enforcement discretion policy guidance on May 24th, just 8 calendar days after publication of the guidance. So that can give a point of reference that it could be as quickly as that. But again, so much depends on the completeness and the quality of the request and the responsiveness of the requester should we come back with additional questions or needs for further information.
One of the most frequently asked questions was, does the label need to be in English?
FDA is prioritizing products that have English language labeling or can be quickly relabeled in English.
And we did get a question about Operation Formula Fly, and we got this question from Gregor Cato from the British Embassy. Could you provide details on the use of Department of Defense air freight to import product and whether that will involve different import procedures?
The use of Department of Defense air freight under Operation Formula Fly is being coordinated either through the White House administration or the military directly, and they will have those conversations with the firms involved in the shipment. As far as the import procedures, those will remain the same. An entry needs to be filed, prior notice needs to be filed, and we'll handle those shipments as they arrive in the U.S.
We also received several questions regarding timelines of the enforcement discretion period. One question we received was from Lucas Zanicelli, who is an IMF infant formula producer in Germany. Is there any guidance on what the temporary limitation for this regulation will be? 2 months, 2 years?
The enforcement discretion policy guidance will expire on November the 14th, 2022, roughly 6 months after its issuance. We at FDA are going to continue our efforts in evaluating and monitoring the U.S. infant formula supply, and will consider extending that period if needed.
We received a question from Dandon Chen, which reads, the application requires the company to disclose the inventory available volume. Once approved, does FDA expect the inventory to be fully committed to the U.S. or is it largely driven by the U.S. market demand? And then another question we received related, once the plant product will be approved by the FDA, will the manufacturer be allocated volumes? Who will be buying the infant formula, FDA or private sector? And then is there a target volume that the FDA is looking for to relieve the current formula shortage?
That's quite a landscape. Janisha, we're interested in the product volume that the manufacturer would intend to supply to the U.S. market, not overall production volume for distribution globally or in current markets that may not be U.S. markets. So we're interested in the product volume the manufacturer would intend to supply to the U.S. market. We do not at this time have a target volume for this temporary enforcement discretion policy period. We also do not have plans to allocate volume to individual manufacturers. And lastly, as I think I mentioned previously, FDA will not be purchasing infant formula.
Will FDA be fast-tracking custom clearance for formula when it arrives to the USA?
Yes, we will. This is a priority, obviously, for the administration and for the agency. And in the import program, we will set up our electronic screening systems to help facilitate these shipments, as well as providing instructions to our field staff, all with an eye towards moving these products through the system as quickly as possible.
Will there be a prioritization for consideration of applicants, for example, volume, etc.?
FDA is prioritizing its review of requests using several factors. A critical factor is the completeness and clarity with which a manufacturer addresses the elements described in the guidance. I mentioned earlier a triage type of review right up front. Additional factors in our prioritization include the volume available for introduction into commerce and how quickly a manufacturer will be able to make that volume available and distribute it. Requests with the potential to fill serious gaps in the supply of certain formulas, for example, medical specialty formulas. Those requests will receive special attention.
And we also received questions related to the November deadline. We received a question from Kay Jensen. If product is imported under the enforcement discretion, will it have to be withdrawn by November 14th, 2022, or will it be allowed to remain in the market until its expiration?
Yeah, again, good questions. Products for which enforcement discretion is granted can be introduced into commerce until November the 14th, 2022, but not after that date unless we extend the expiration date of our guidance. We do not intend to direct manufacturers to withdraw products that are already in commerce on that date.
All right, so we received a question from Lindsay Hoagland, and it reads, from a retailer perspective, if there is a vendor outside of the U.S. shipping to multiple U.S. retailers, do all retailers need to collect the same information to be able to import after FDA approval?
So the first part here is that the enforcement discretion is being applied to the manufacturer of the products and the specific products that they provided information to FDA for. For the retailers or importers here in the United States, the import process will require the identification of who the manufacturer is, who the shipper is, who that importer is, and then where the product is going, who the consignee is. So in that respect, all of the information, regardless of who the importer is, the same pieces of information need to be provided.
Another question about the November 14th, 2022 deadline, and it comes from Elisa Vita Johnson. Will extension beyond November 14th be decided on a case-by-case basis?
In a word, no. If FDA decides that an extension beyond November the 14th is necessary, we will announce the extension publicly and it will apply to all stakeholders.
Will a manufacturer lose their place in the document review order if they should be requested to provide additional information to FDA?
Generally speaking, no. We are doing some overall prioritization, however, which will guide the review queuing overall.
And we received a question from S. Barty. Will manufacturers be allowed to provide additional information once they have submitted their request for enforcement discretion?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, if questions arise during the review of a manufacturer's request, FDA may ask for additional information. Once we receive it, we will continue our review. If manufacturers have noticed a gap, they themselves notice a gap in what they've submitted, they can supplement their request.
This question is from Michael Dykes. Will state approval be required to import infant formula?
The United States federal government has jurisdiction over the importation of products into the U.S., so no, state approval is not required for import into the U.S.
And our next question comes from B. Waltrip. If enforcement discretion is granted for our product, what is the status of our product longer term?
Receiving a letter of enforcement discretion for your product will allow you to introduce it into commerce up to and including November the 14th, 2022. It will not provide long-term or indefinite access to the U.S. market. If your product currently meets the definition of a new infant formula, that's the legal definition of a new infant formula, after the enforcement discretion period is over, you will need to meet all statutory and regulatory requirements that apply to new infant formulas in order to have long-term access to the U.S. marketplace. So that means even though your product may have been in commerce in the U.S. for several months, that hasn't changed its legal status as a new infant formula. And I'd like to take a moment here to touch briefly on this, although fully exploring it could take a whole webinar in itself. But what is a new infant formula? Under our Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, a new infant formula includes an infant formula manufactured by a person that has not previously manufactured infant formula. And that's within the context of manufactured and marketed for the U.S. marketplace. So if you are a manufacturer who has not been in the U.S. marketplace previously and you're introducing a formula, that formula is a new infant formula under the law. And a new infant formula also includes an infant formula manufactured by a person which has previously manufactured infant formula and in which there is a major change in processing or formulation from any current or any previous formulation produced by the manufacturer. And some examples of major changes are a new manufacturing plant, a new production line, employment of significant new technology, fundamental change in the packaging used, addition of a new macronutrient, that is a new protein, fat, or carbohydrate source, or substantial change in the amount of those macronutrients. And lastly, addition of new ingredients. That list is not all-inclusive, but it's meant to give you a sense of what can legally make you a new infant formula.
And the next question is related, and it's from Dr. I.C. Teller. Could you please also provide the link to the mentioned FDA Bacteriological Analytical Manual that the test methods that you prefer?
We will add links to our list of resources, of course.
Okay, so we have a question from Andre Dos Santos. Would the sale of infant formula from a certain country be allowed to sell to individuals from that country in the United States? For example, a Vietnamese market, a Brazilian market, a Mexican market, or a Chinese market?
The enforcement discretion being provided by the agency is specific to particular manufacturers and is not broad-based in the way that the question implies.
So we received many questions on the pathway or process for long-term entry into the U.S. market. We see questions about registrations and notifications, regular requirements, etc. Pat, can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, I'm happy to give a little bit more, Janisha. But as I said, to cover this adequately really would take an entire webinar in itself. But for now, I will just refer people to our website, and I'll note we'll be adding a couple of resources to the list provided in our earlier webinar. And I'll refer you also to the regulations in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, primarily Part 106, with some additional detail on topics such as nutrient specifications and labeling in Part 107. And we'll be providing links to a couple of the most critical resources that are up on our website so that folks become fully acquainted with the regular requirements for introducing a new infant formula to the marketplace.
And our next question is on micro-testing, and this comes from D-Chin. Do the Coronabacter and Salmonella testing samples numbers have to be the exact numbers stated by FDA?
Regarding the microbiological testing, you can provide results using different sampling numbers to start your enforcement discretion request. But ultimately, FDA will need the results using our recommended minimum sampling numbers to fully evaluate your request and grant enforcement discretion. If you do not have results using those recommended minimum sampling numbers, you should indicate a date by which you expect to be able to have them.
All right, so we have another question from Ben Busser. Given the shortages, why are U.S. Customs still actively, increasingly blocking deliveries of online purchases of infant formulas from abroad?
That's a good question. And, while we are taking this enforcement discretion approach and creating a pathway for, foreign suppliers to market their products in the U.S., we are also going to continue with our consumer protection mission in continuing to stop products that are either subject to an import alert, and we're also going to stop shipments of products that are not authorized either under the enforcement discretion or historically, because you cannot allow the distribution of these products until there's been the appropriate review by the agency.
All right, so moving on to, we received a few questions on testing and test methods. Here's an example of one common question that we got in this category, and it was from Jay Atwater. What if test methods were not the AOAC International specified test methods?
In this case, the test methods used should be specified and a copy of the method provided. We're providing some flexibility around test methods, but we do need to know specifically what method was used to obtain the results. And if it is not a compendial method, a copy of the method is critical.
And then we also received a number of questions about nutrient testing. For example, from Oz. For the summary of nutrient test results, are results from only one batch requested or average of the results related to more than one batch? Related, we received another question from M9. Can the testing results be from a different batch other than the batch for importing?
What we are looking for and what we outlined in the guidance is the most recent batch or lot produced at each applicable facility in 4-H formula. We want a summary of the test results that are conducted at the final product stage of the level of each nutrient required by our regulations at 21 CFR 107.100. And for nutrients that are not required by our regulations, an example would be DHA. For example, many infant formulas contain that. A nutrient added by the infant formula manufacturer, we would like a summary of the test results for that nutrient presented in units for 100 kilocalories.
All right, so to conclude today's additional question and answer session, we'd like to thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please see our Food Information Center, and that link is on the slide, as well as the link to send the information described in the guidance to the email box listed on the slide, bullet number 2. And then if you have any general questions about the guidance or need more information about the guidance, see the first link in the bullet. And with that, we will say goodbye and thank you again for tuning in. And more information will be shared as it is presented to us. Thank you.